Hey, it's Amara from Giant Stride Media, and I've got a question for you. Is your CPA looking super high at the moment, and you're beginning to freak out because you're not exactly sure what the root cause is? Well, if that's the case, don't panic. I've got a few ideas in this video to share with you, which should help you troubleshoot the problem and hopefully bring your CPA back under control. So when you've got a high CPA on Facebook, or if it's beginning to creep up in a way that's making you feel slightly uncomfortable, I suggest you focus on these four areas: account structure, audience, creative, and landing page. And in this video, we're going to be exploring each of these areas in detail to help you bring down your CPA. All right, let's dive in. When it comes to troubleshooting a high CPA, the first thing I suggest you take a look at is your account structure, because tackling this one first could offer you low-hanging fruits compared to other factors like your creative and audiences. So Facebook released a paper not too long ago called The Power of Five. And I'm going to leave a link in the description for those who are interested in diving into this document. But in essence, this paper contains a framework of 5 tactics which, when combined, can significantly improve the performance of your ads. So one of the tactics they had in that paper is simplified account structure, and that's why I'm putting it in here. The reason for this is that Facebook is now automating away a lot of the account management activities that would previously be handled by humans. So they're now automating away a lot of these with machine learning algorithms. And these machine learning algorithms love simplified accounts. I think it would help to actually illustrate this using a diagram. So the bit on the left shows the old way of running campaigns, which involved a lot of manual intervention. In the old world, we had to constantly keep our eyes on the ball. So we had to keep our eyes on the ball, monitoring progress and distributing budgets across multiple campaigns and ad sets. But with the introduction of automation and campaign budget optimization, this is no longer necessary. Now we can get the algorithm to work for us, which gives us more time to actually focus on what matters: creatives. To be honest with you, I think creatives is the new frontier, and brands that are able to double down on improving their creatives would benefit big time. So I've shared the tactic of simplifying accounts, but before we wrap up this point, I want to share my thinking around why algorithms typically prefer to work with fewer campaigns in an account. I'm sure some of you are already aware of how campaigns are structured. So you'd usually start with campaigns at the top of the hierarchy, followed by ad sets, and then ads, and then last but not least, you've got placements, which are where these ads are shown. So you have a situation where the machine learning algorithm is constantly shifting budget in real time towards placements, ads, and ad sets that offer you the lowest cost optimization events. And when you have multiple campaigns running simultaneously within those ad sets, and you have many ad sets and a ton of ads within those ad sets, you have a situation where you're giving the algorithm more work than it should be having. All right, so you want to ease the workload on the algorithms by providing it with a simplified way of accessing campaign data. And that's why you want to keep your campaign structured super simple. So in essence, to get the best optimization results from the algorithm, I found that consolidating account data across just 2 conversion campaigns can work really well. I must say, there's no hard and fast rule on the number of campaigns to set in your account, But the general thrust of this message is less is more. Here's the structure we're currently using at the agency. We've reduced the number of campaigns in the accounts we manage for clients from over 10 campaigns in some cases down to just two, one for prospecting and one for retargeting. And look, we may run a couple more campaigns under different objectives like traffic and view content, predominantly for visibility purposes. But when it comes down to conversion campaigns, we like to limit it to just two, one for prospecting and the other for retargeting. Now let's move on to audiences. And over here, the first thing I want you to check is whether you're using a super broad audience, a very broad audience. And in some situations, I've seen that using very broad audiences can deliver spectacular results, right? It's like really, really good results, especially when you have a pixel that's sufficiently seasoned, right? So what I'm saying is you have a pixel that you've put through a lot of purchases through and a lot of engagement through. I'm referring to audiences of 5 to 10% lookalikes if you're using predominantly lookalikes, or if you're using the interest, I'm referring to audiences with 100 million people, even audiences that only have demographics with no lookalikes or interests. So I'm talking about big audiences, right? So you may find yourself in a situation where these type of audiences have worked really well for you in the past, but for some reason they've suddenly just tanked, right? The performance has just gone down the toilet or down the drain. If that's the case, what I suggest you do is to scale back the budget on your campaign. So scale it back down and then scale back down the size of the lookalike audience. So if you were using a 5 to 10% lookalike and things are beginning to go a bit haywire, I would suggest you scale back down the lookalike audience to a 1% lookalike audience. And for that 1% lookalike audience, I suggest you focus on purchases, right? Because that's the most targeted one. And what you want to do is to watch whether your CPA changes, whether it reduces as a result of this change. And if it does, if it goes back down to normal, then you can then start slowly scaling back up your campaign. So slowly scaling back up your budget and also the size of the audience. In some cases, this may work for you, but if it doesn't work for you, what I suggest you do next is to test out brand new lookalike audiences, some of which you may or may not have considered. So here are some of our go-to lookalike audiences. You've got nice 5% video views. This works really well, especially when you're using video creatives. You got website visitors. You got visitors by time spent. We usually restrict this to the top 25% of visitors. Then you got add to cart and initiate checkout. And actually, last but not least, let me not forget value-based lookalike audiences. And for value-based lookalike audiences, you want to restrict this to, you want to create this rather when you've had 500 or more purchases. And in terms of the time duration within which you want to capture this audience, I'll say limit it to 30 days. So test out these new audiences and see if any of them perform better than the existing lookalike audiences we're using. You may well find that some of these perform better than, for example, your purchase audience, but it's worth testing. Now, similar to some of the points I mentioned around simplifying your account structure, you want to make sure that you're segmenting your audiences into prospecting and retargeting, right? And housing these audiences under different campaigns as opposed to bunching them up within the same campaign. In your prospecting campaign, I suggest you limit the number of ad sets to 4. There's no hard and fast rule, but I simply limit mine to 4 ad sets. You can keep testing new ad sets, right? So there's no restriction around testing new ad sets, but restricting the number of ad sets to a certain limit, so it could be 4 or 5, would give Facebook enough budget to actually distribute between those ad sets and optimize budgets between those ad sets. But assuming, let's say for example, you had like 20 ad sets in a campaign, it's going to be very hard for Facebook to distribute enough budget to optimize performance within those ad sets. So that's why I usually go for a few number of ad sets within a campaign. Over on the right, I've listed some of the audiences we test out for top of funnel prospecting campaigns. So here I've listed out what I've called wide audiences, and this consists of, a country that's selected with no restrictions around age and gender, and also no interest audience, right? So this is a super broad audience. And then the next one is a broad interest audience. Over here as well, you've got a country that's selected with no restrictions around age and gender. But then in terms of the audience, the interest audience you use, you want to go for a really broad interest audience, so 50 to 100 million. And obviously this is going to be impacted by the size of the country you're trying to target. An interest audience for Sweden, for example, is going to be very different from an interest audience for the US in terms of size. So broad is very relative, but as broad as you can get, basically. And then you have lookalike audiences. And as I mentioned, if you have a situation where things have gone a bit out of control, you want to start with a 1% lookalike audience of purchases, add to cart, view content, and video views. And also, one I like using as well is a concept of audiences called super lookalike audiences. And what this is a combination of a 1% lookalike audience of purchases, 1% lookalike audience of your add to carts, 1% lookalike audience of your video views and view content, and much more. And you basically combine all of these into one super lookalike audience in your ad set. So this tends to work really well as well. So these are the 4 types of audiences and I like to use across the 4 ad sets I mentioned earlier. And then for retargeting campaigns, what I like to do for my retargeting campaign is to just have 2 ad sets in the campaign. One ad set for middle of funnel and the other ad set for bottom of funnel. And the way I classify my middle of funnel audience are audiences that have watched at least, let's say, 10 seconds of my video, audiences that have engaged with my Facebook post or ads, or audiences that have engaged with me on Instagram. So those would constitute my middle of funnel audiences. And then for bottom of funnel audiences, I'm looking at the top 25% of website visitors and also people who have added to cart, right? So this is what would constitute as my bottom of funnel ad set audience. And in terms of time duration, I usually like to set this to 180 days. And the reason I do this is to keep these warm prospects within my retargeting bucket for as long as possible. And at the same time, making sure that my top of funnel prospecting bucket is kept fresh with new prospects. So to conclude audiences, the reason why you want to separate it out like this is you just want to make it as easy as possible for the algorithm to access your campaign data. So, it's going to be like, okay, look, I know that this campaign is specifically for prospecting, so I'm going to optimize it accordingly. And this campaign over here is for a much warmer audience, so I'm also going to optimize that accordingly. When it comes to creatives, I'd say ad fatigue is usually the number one reason for high CPAs, especially if that creative has performed well previously. So ad fatigue happens when your audience has been saturated with a particular creative. And this results in what's known as banner blindness. The bottom line here I'd want you to focus on is you've worn out your audience, right? So you've worn out your audience with the creative and it's no longer having the effect it used to have in the past. If this is the case, the best thing to do is to launch new creatives, right? So launch new creatives that provide a fresh take on your product. And these new creatives should be released and be geared towards grabbing attention. So what you want to do is grab attention and get the prospects intrigued enough by your creatives to click over to your website because they want to learn more about what you have to offer. So before moving on to the next point, I just want to stress that it's really important to have a process for continuously improving your creatives. You can think of it like a Darwinian process for your creatives, where you're constantly weeding out creatives that don't perform and studying the ones that perform to understand the factors that are driving performance. Then once you've figured out the essence of your best performing creatives, you can start testing random variations of those creatives and continuously cycling through the process over again and again. The second point I want to address on the creatives is placement formatting. So a placement in a nutshell is where your Facebook creatives are shown. So these could include feeds, stories, in streams, search, messages, in articles, or in partner network applications. Now, some of you already know that Facebook recommends not putting any restrictions on placements. And by putting no restrictions on placements, what you're doing is giving the algorithm the most flexibility to find you the lowest cost results. But in order to get the most out of these placements, you need to ensure that your creatives are optimized for them. So by default, most people would usually just upload their creatives using the newsfeed format. But this results in subpar looking creatives on other placements. So I'd recommend you don't do this. The best thing to do is to figure out the formatting requirements of each of the placements I've just mentioned and make sure your creatives are designed and formatted to meet those requirements. So the last thing I want to address on the creatives is funnel symmetry. And the simple question you want to ask here is, are the creatives in my campaign aligned with what I'm showing on my landing page? Having messaging in your creatives that's misaligned with the offer on your landing page creates what's known as cognitive dissonance in prospects. And this typically leads to a high bounce rate. So what happens is when someone clicks over from your ad and lands on your landing page, you want it to feel like a natural progression. You want it to feel like, okay, look, this makes sense to me. You don't want them to be confused as to what you're offering. Oh, I saw one thing on the ad creative. Now I'm seeing something totally different or not so similar to what I saw on the ad creative, right? So you want to keep everything aligned, and that's what's known as funnel symmetry. So, I've seen some ads that talk about one thing, and then when you land on the landing page, you got something that is not very congruent to the messaging on the ad. So the bottom line here is, so I don't waffle on, the bottom line here is, if you want to improve your funnel symmetry, you want to make sure that the messaging on your ad creative is congruent with what you've got on your landing page. Right, we've just covered 3 areas to troubleshoot within your Facebook account, right? We've covered account structure, we've covered audiences and creatives. I just want to make one last point before we move over to landing pages. And what I want to say is, if your campaign has gone off the rails, and it happens to the best of us, so there's no shame in that. What you want to do is to see whether there are things that can improve within these 3 buckets. And if you can find some things to improve within these 3 buckets of creative, audience, and account structure, what I would advise you to do is, rather than trying to tweak your existing campaigns, what I would suggest you do is to just shut the existing campaigns down and start new campaigns from scratch using some of the lessons we've just covered. So basically, you're starting with a solid foundation rather than try to tweak the existing campaigns. And what I've found sometimes is that just having a hard reset can do wonders for your CPAs. Just starting from scratch, killing the existing campaigns that aren't doing well, and starting from scratch and using these principles that we just discussed to build those campaigns can work wonders. So the next thing I want to cover is landing pages, and this is the final area we're going to cover. And it's, I can't stress how important it is to get this one right, because it would be a shame if you ace the other three areas, right, and have a landing page that lets you down. So, it's like capturing, fresh spring water in a bucket full of holes. You don't want to do that. So in this section, I'm going to share how to plug the holes in your landing page to capture more customers. The first thing you want to look at is the load speed of your landing page, right? A ton of research has been done to show that the number of people who bounce off your site goes up exponentially as load time increases. So, based on this, since we know that the relationship between bounce rate and load times is not linear, but exponential, it is super critical to ensure that your site loads quickly. Very, very important. And as you know, these days, a lot of people, I'd say most people, don't have the patience to wait for a slow site, right? So, most people don't have the patience to wait for a slow site that loads, especially when they've already experienced sites that load at lightning speeds. So one good tool to help you diagnose exactly where your site is, where your landing page is, and prescribe changes to make to optimize performance is Google Page Speed Insights. If you've not used this tool before, I highly recommend you check it out. It's something I use all the time for our clients, and I really like it. Now, once you've sorted out the load speed of your landing page, the next thing I recommend you have a look at is improving the clarity of your value proposition above the fold. So to illuminate this, let's take a look at Take Care Of, which is a website I really like. Here's their website and it looks pretty cool. So as the saying goes, first impressions really matter. And the same applies to your landing page, right? Everything above the fold on your landing page is going to create an impression on your prospects that either makes them want to explore more about what you have to offer or bounce straight off your site. So it's really key to make sure that your value proposition is crystal clear above the fold. And by value proposition, what I'm referring to is the innovation, benefits, or features that differentiate your brand or product. So essentially, what is it that makes your brand or product attractive to customers? You want to really drill down and make sure that it's super clear above the fold. Looking at the example of Take Care Of, we can see that their value proposition is pretty clear. Right? What they're doing is they're offering personalized supplements that help you take care of different aspects of your health. And look, you can always elaborate further down the page, but you want to make sure that the kernel of your value proposition is very clear above the fold. And by above the fold, this is what I mean. From the top of the page to the bottom of the page without scrolling. Look, if you need some help with this, because it's very difficult to objectively look at your page sometimes because you're so close to it, what I recommend you do is to check a tool called Usability Hub. And this tool will help you crystallize your value proposition. It's basically a platform that enables you crowdsource opinions from thousands of random strangers, right? It's like thousands and thousands of random strangers. And what Usability Hub does is it gives these strangers only 5 seconds to say what they think your site offers. So play around with it, get some feedback from these random strangers, and make the necessary changes above the fold and ensure that your value proposition is coming through. So, it's an iterative process, not something you just do once and forget. You want to continuously do that and get feedback on your value proposition, or on the clarity of your value proposition rather. Now, the last thing I want to address under optimizing your landing pages is increasing the trust factor on your site. And I want to preface this by a quote from Jonathan Haidt. And this quote goes like this: "The rational mind thinks it's the Oval Office when it's actually the press office." And this is one of my favorite quotes about human behavior. And what it says is that the majority of your prospects are going to make decisions on whether or not they're going to buy your product subconsciously, right? So they make their buying decisions subconsciously and then post-rationalize why they bought it. So based on this, you want to make sure that you're using the right tools to build trust subconsciously, because it's at the subconscious level that your prospects are making purchasing decisions, right? So without further ado, here are the tactics at your disposal for increasing the trust factor on your site. Number one, I'd say invest in the best UI UX designer you can afford. So you want to invest in the best designer you can afford to make your site look beautiful. It's very important to do this. And look, I know beauty is very subjective, so what you want to do is to make sure that any design updates you're making are made by looking through the eyes of your customers. So you want to do it by looking through the eyes of your customers, because look, if a site is poorly designed and it provides a subpar experience, what you're potentially doing is signaling that maybe your product isn't that good. And, look, this may not be the case. You may have an amazing product, but your prospects will jump to conclusions using heuristics. Heuristics are basically, they're essentially mental shortcuts that people take when making decisions, right? So they're going to quickly jump to conclusions to think that, based on the quality of your site, maybe your product isn't that good. But if your site is well designed, right, you've got a really good looking landing page that offers a superb user experience, what you're signaling is that, hey, look, we've got a really healthy business and we've got the resources to invest in a site that looks good. And, this concept is actually an evolutionary biology concept. And, if you look into nature, you can see that flowers make their petals very beautiful, as beautiful as possible, to signal to bees that, look, we have the resources to produce good quality nectar. And this in turn is what attracts the bees. So you want to use the same thing on your website. You want to use the same concept to make your landing page beautiful as possible to attract and keep your customers. Something else that helps to build trust on your landing page is social proof. And you want to generate social proof in your prospects by displaying your customer testimonials, your customer reviews. It could be in video format or written format, and even success stories as well helps. You want to display this. And the reason why you want to leverage social proof is that, humans display what's known as herd behavior. And what this means is that we typically feel more comfortable doing what others are doing. So if you can just show proof upon proof upon proof on your landing page that, hey, look, other people have used this product and have had a really good experience from it, and look at how they're sort of glowing about their experience, people are more likely to take that leap of faith and also purchase from you. So that's something to take note of. The final suggestion I have for you under increasing trust on your landing page is by making sure your contact details are visible, right? So you want to visibly display your contact details on your site. And by doing so, what you're doing is you're providing your prospects with the reassurance that if they ever have a problem, they can simply email you or pick up the phone and get in touch. And conversely, by not doing so, right, you might be making them feel a little bit nervous, right? You might be making them feel a bit nervous about moving forward with a purchase. And this might be happening at a subconscious level. So they may not consciously know why they're not buying, but just the fact that you don't have a way of people to get in contact with you might make them feel nervous about going through with the purchase. So it's something that you want to certainly pay attention to. So we've come to the end of the video, and look, I appreciate we've gone through quite a lot, but I hope you're able to walk away with a couple of ideas from this to help you improve your CPA, to help you bring down that Facebook CPA and get it under control. All right, guys, thanks for watching and have a great day.